Okay, great. So welcome everyone who's joining us for this clinic, which is one of our AHub clinic series, and I'll be explaining why we're calling it that way. Where this one is focused on AI readiness. So let's jump straight in, and we can start. A lot of you who've been joining socialprotection.org webinars recently will know all of this, but it's always worth repeating. The session is being recorded and it will be available on socialprotection.org. You'll be able to see it then. You can use the chat box to present yourself, make comments, or share useful links, and that would be really helpful so that we get to know who is in the room today. There is simultaneous interpretation available, and you can go to your interpretation button and select the language. We have French and Spanish available. And you can use automatic captions generated with Zoom AI if you want, and you can click on that CC closed captions button. And most importantly, well, we'll come to the fact that it's a clinic, so we'll have more interaction, but you can start your interaction through the Q&A box if you want. So we kind of have a few topics that we can start discussing there, but you will be able to actually come in actively today. So let's come to our agenda. We're going to start with a bit of welcome and setting the scene. We'll have a framing input on what do we mean by AI readiness, and we'll be sharing a draft tool that we would like your support in helping us to finalize, to really make sure that it's hitting the right, it's using the right lens, it's useful to you as potential future users of it. And Rob Worthington will be supporting us with that. We're then having two speakers who are really going to help us just set the scene and give us some ideas of how they have dealt with readiness in Canada and Uzbekistan, and I'll be presenting our speakers soon. And then we have our structured dialogue, our clinic, where we'll be broadly touching on these three topics of ambition versus reality, readiness gaps, and sequencing, and what we could be doing differently to be kind of ensuring we're ready. And at the end, this is sort of, if you want to, you can be joining for an extra 30 minutes for an off-the-record peer exchange where we won't be recording. This won't be going online, so we can be getting our teeth into some of the more contentious, difficult issues if you want. So this is sort of open to anyone who wants to stay. Now, why are we calling it a clinic and not a webinar? Because it's not frontal. It's not us speaking to you and giving you any answer. We're really hoping to get some interaction here and to be learning together on this journey. And any of you who have experience having thought through any of this within the social protection sector or beyond, we really welcome your opinions, your experiences, and your points of view. So we'll be trying to get as much interaction as we can. Just to give some background to those of you who are not familiar, this webinar is being led through the AI Hub for Social Protection. And obviously I'm here today, I'm your host, I'm Valentina Barca, I work with DCI, but we've got people in the room today who've really been the ones who've been designing this webinar, Honga Ross being one of them and Francisca Clauses being another. And the AI Hub is a global partnership that works within DCI, within the Digital Convergence Initiative, and its focus is on harnessing the potential of AI for social protection while really making sure the safeguards are in place. So it's supporting the design, implementation, governance of AI solutions in social protection specifically, empowering institutions to shape their AI journey, learning from others, not falling into common pitfalls, really kind of trying to get the ethical dimension left, right, and center, and facilitating global peer-to-peer learning. And obviously we have quite a few partners on board, including our Canadian counterparts who are actually kind of with us today. Now, the AI Hub supports partner countries in very different ways. So the knowledge sharing I'll actually be going into a little bit more depth on in a second, but it's about really harnessing what knowledge we already have and making sure we're sort of seeing through that common lens when we're working on this globally. The digital public goods, the technical blueprints, the standards, the guidelines, country support, which can be sort of actually provided to you. So if that's something of interest, do reach out to the AI Hub, and capacity development as well. And if you see, for example, the most recent AI Hub newsletter, we speak to a few capacity development opportunities that are forthcoming. So I said the knowledge products, I'd just give you a little taste of what's coming. We're really on the edge of publishing these publications. There's a definitional framework and taxonomy, which shapes our shared definitions and concepts, how we're even thinking about this in the first place. What are the key use cases? How do they map to the social protection system? There's a global evidence review, which is also being showcased on a repository website, which you can be kind of digging into with a lot more depth, looking across social assistance, social insurance, and labor market programs. How have other countries done this? What risks have they faced? How have they addressed those? It's kind of answering some of those questions. There's a really important risk framework and toolkit that goes with that, kind of that looks at what risks are emerging, how can we be mitigating those, how can we be evaluating our use cases against those risks and building safeguards, and a data sovereignty one, which really digs into responsible AI deployment, thinking about data sovereignty, which obviously is particularly crucial in this moment in time. Okay, if you're interested to join this network, if you're interested to collaborate, you can go and see the website. You can contact at spdci.org, or you could use this the QR code that you see here. Great. So coming to today's session, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go quite quickly. Apologies to the translators. As I said, this is one of 6 clinics. This first one is focused on readiness. It's the kind of 101 that we start from the beginning, so we need to be ready. And the next ones will be happening over the next few months. So if you've enjoyed today, if you feel maybe another session is even more interesting and useful for you, do please join those on data foundations, responsible AI, going beyond efficiency. Sometimes we see AI as just supporting us to achieve efficiency in our sector, but it can do so much more if we're thinking about it comprehensively. How do we do use case scoping and building up that risk framework to kind of shift towards action? Now, today, we're going to go through kind of a bit of this kind of step-by-step learning journey. We're starting. Give us feedback if you feel kind of this format is working, is not working. That would be really great to know. We're going to be focusing on both success and failure, and we're going to be sharing some practical tools. And in fact, today, we're going to look at these readiness steps. We're going to examine some country case studies. We're going to be thinking through what readiness means to you. And we're going to give you the opportunity to take a peek at the draft version of the AI readiness self-assessment tool, which we'd love your feedback on as well. So I think I've said enough as an introduction. I'm going to be quickly handing over to our first expert, who's going to just give us a bit of an overview. What do we even mean by AI readiness? And what does the tool that we're going to be sharing with you look like? And what would we like to hear from you on this tool? But before I do that, let me just remind you that, as I've said, we want to give space to interaction. So we've got some of these structured interventions at the start. But if there's something that you find is urgent that you really want to be saying or interrupting, you can raise your hand, and we will be able to spotlight you and have you intervene. And it doesn't, even if it's slowing us down, it doesn't matter, because that's part of our objective, is the interaction. So over to Rob to start with. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Valentina. Thanks for the introduction. There should be one framing slide, if you wouldn't mind just moving to that after this one.
Has that appeared?
Not seeing it yet.
Okay, it might be that I got unshared. Yeah. My screen got unshared. Okay.
There we go. That seems to be coming now. Yeah, great. Okay, so thanks, Valentina. So yeah, I'm just going to talk you through sort of 4 things really. So firstly, just to kind of talk through why are we looking at readiness now? You know, why do we feel this tool is needed? I'm going to touch briefly on the evidence base, just to kind of help you understand, you know, what the evidence review we've done is kind of pointing to. I'm going to walk you through the tool, where you can see on the slide here, there's kind of 6 key areas we've mapped out. And then we would like to go straight into an interactive Mentimeter session with you to get your feedback on some of the initial kind of framing questions that we would like to discuss with you, both in this session and in any follow-up, to help us to further co-develop the tool. My colleague Konga has a link to the tool. So as I'm talking, you can actually sort of download the draft tool and look at it yourself. So Honga, if you wouldn't mind, please posting that link in the chat. It will take you back to the kind of the webinar sign up page. So what you're looking for is a link at the bottom of that where it says download the tool. So do let us know in the chat if you're struggling to actually download it. Okay, great. So Valentina, if you wouldn't mind stopping the screen sharing, I'll just sort of share the draft tool and I'll quickly walk people through it so that you have an understanding of what we're working on here. So just give me 1 second while I find that. Apologies, there's a multitude of windows I'm looking between here.
While you're looking for it, let me just say, Oscar, I see your hand is up. When Rob is finished, then I'll hand over to you for our first kind of from the audience intervention.
Great, thanks. Okay, hopefully that's visible to everybody now. So let me just sort of kick off then in terms of why, and you'll see we've got a little sort of framing section here. I mean, this has been a burning question for us for a while in the AI Hub, and I think the key thing that we're trying to understand here is what does it actually take for a social protection agency to be ready to use AI responsibly? You'll see as you sort of come through the tool and look at the audience that we're considering, that we have done some analysis of some of the sort of core frameworks that are out there. And I think there's some excellent work that we're building on. But I think what we're seeing is that either the frameworks are kind of aimed at sort of government broadly, or they're very technical. They're aiming sort of at, the sort of technical readiness of institutions generally. So we've kind of found that there really isn't something that's aimed for the staff and leadership of social protection agencies, the people that are actually going to be exploring AI, making the day-to-day decisions about whether and if they should introduce AI. So the core question that we really want to help agencies to answer is, are we institutionally ready to introduce AI responsibly into our work? And if we feel we're not ready, what sort of things do we need to do first? You'll see that there is a bit of a review of case studies, and I'm sure many of you are aware of some of these. There have been some pretty prominent kind of really problematic uses of AI within the social protection sector already. It's quite an unfortunate sort of start, but there have been some really high profile failures. I think, one of the things that we see kind of drawing across these, which has really, I think, emphasized why this is so important, is that, yes, obviously there are technical challenges, but there are also some quite significant readiness challenges. And I think one of the common threads that we see with these and other sort of negative case studies is a failure of governance, of the legal basis, of data quality, of human oversight or accountability. And hence, why we feel some kind of readiness assessment tool is really needed and needed in sort of plain language aimed at non-technical audiences to help them to determine for themselves whether their institution is ready. So what do we have in terms of the structure for this? So as you saw from the slides, moving on to the sort of draft of the tool, we have 6 key areas that we're proposing to use as the sort of structure for the tool. I'm not going to go through these in detail now because we want to have time for you to discuss. I'll just give you a quick sort of flavor of each of them. So the first is strategic and political readiness. And here really the essence of this is, does the institution have a clear and honest vision for AI? And does anybody actually own the decision to use AI in different ways and understand the risks and ultimately have the authority to say no, not just yes? And I think that's a consistent kind of thread that we're seeing in the evidence base, that, often there's a political commitment to a particular outcome, to use AI to perhaps make things more efficient, to reduce fraud, to improve speed, but not necessarily a commitment also to the process of responsible adoption. And I think this is a particular risk for agencies in lower income contexts, is that, perhaps AI gets driven by the enthusiasm of donors, of vendor demonstrations, rather than really a genuine internal assessment of readiness. So that's one of the key areas, strategic and political readiness. The next one I think is equally important, which is the legal and regulatory readiness. And here, the fundamental question is there a sound legal basis for what the agency is doing or what it's planning to do with AI? One of the case studies that you saw mentioned above, the robo-debt case study from Australia, unfortunately, was actually deemed to be an unlawful scheme. And if you look at some of the sort of assessments of it, it seems that there was never really any formal legal assessment, or if there was, it was never really properly signed off. And I think, we can see that with a number of other case studies. So it's important, I think, that we bring this legal area out of the shadows and make sure that the program teams that are looking at the use of AI are able to understand whether there actually is a legal basis to use AI for what they want to use it for. Is it possible for a beneficiary to challenge that use of AI? And if so, how would they do that? One of the things that we're noting is the EU AI Act, which is obviously now coming into force and acting as a kind of a framework for many countries, classifies use of AI in social protection as high risk, which is something that really exemplifies this. The third area that we're proposing as the kind of structure for this are the data foundations. And I think for those of you with a kind of a strong background in digital, this doesn't come as a surprise, and it's very similar to the kind of broader focus on data governance that we may take with data systems generally. So as I think most people are very familiar, AI systems are really only going to be as good as the data that they consume. And having problematic data is going to lead really with problems with the output. Systematic bias is obviously one of the key issues here, and I think you can see from some of the case studies that I quickly skimmed over, as with the one that's I think mentioned here on Serbia, is particularly problematic, where if you have data that is perhaps excluding certain marginalized populations or people with particular vulnerabilities, that can obviously lead to bias within your data, which will effectively amplify that within the AI system. So the key question isn't whether your data is kind of good enough on average, but whether it has good data for the people that are most at risk of exclusion. The third area, just to touch on briefly, is technology and infrastructure. And really, this is the kind of the technical foundation which underpins everything else. So can your existing systems actually support AI deployment effectively? And this obviously connects to the sovereignty area that Valentina mentioned earlier. If your AI has some kind of frontier element to it, is it going to be accessible at the service delivery points in rural or remote areas? If it depends on digital identity, does that include everybody? So a number of sort of fundamental questions here in terms of understanding whether the technology and infrastructure is actually there to support the use of AI that you're planning. The fifth area that we have brought into the tool so far is institutional capacity and governance. And this, coming back to the introduction from the kind of evidence review, is perhaps the dimension that's most consistently implicated in failures. And ultimately, I think we can see this as whether anybody within the institution has both the authority and the responsibility to question the output of an AI system, override them if they're wrong, and escalate concerns, perhaps without risk to their career. What we saw from one of the examples is caseworkers telling beneficiaries, there's nothing I can do. This is what the system has decided. That really exemplifies an institutional failure that human oversight requirements should be designed to prevent, but obviously, staff may not feel that they can actually question the results of the system. So, there's one thing to say they can, but the other thing to really illustrate that they actually have the authority to do that. The last and equally important area that we have included is accountability, ethics, and the rights of beneficiaries. And critical here is the question as to whether AI-supported decisions both can be explained, but also can be contested. This comes down to transparency as well. So has the agency assessed for bias? Has the agency disclosed information in terms of how they're using AI? Are affected communities involved in shaping these decisions, not just informing them? So this is really not just, this is about making involvement not just a consultation exercise, but a quality assurance requirement. So we have now a few questions that we would like to pose to you on Mentimeter, which Valentina will bring up. If you'd like to start that, Vali. These are really just to try and get your initial reactions, and then we'll kind of close with how you can be involved in a more sort of fundamental way in helping to shape the tool further. So the first question that we would like to, there we go. So if you can go to menti.com and enter in the code that you see on the screen, or if you're on a phone, you can use the QR code to. Yeah, thanks. Jeremy's asking if we can post the link as well in the chat. There hopefully is a link that would take you directly to that Mentimeter. So the first question that we would like your feedback on is one of scope, which is really trying to understand whether you feel we should be framing this tool on institutional readiness in general, or whether it should look more specifically at readiness for specific use cases. So an agency may be well prepared to use AI for back office admin, but not for eligibility determination, for example. So, do you feel we should be looking more at the institutional readiness overall, or in relation to specific use cases that are kind of driving the use of AI? Great, thanks. We're seeing some responses already, and definitely a strong bias towards the use case level, which is very interesting.
One thing we can say from our other work across the AI Hub is that obviously different use cases come with very different risk levels and assessments. So there is kind of a reason why we were also tending towards a use case level approach, but interesting to see that the audience is so much in favor of that as well. We might give a few more seconds just because this is the first one. I see 26 of 40 people who've joined have responded, but then we can be faster on the next ones. And if you want to come in with any comments, just raise your hands and we can spotlight you. I think I'll move to the next one then. We've got a response on this one. Okay, why is it not moving there?
Great, thanks. So the next question is looking at threshold conditions. So we could look at the tool as essentially being a guide, saying here are the sorts of things that you should consider. But should there be areas where we set a threshold and say, if you do not have this sort of thing in place, it's not appropriate for you to proceed with AI at this point? And obviously those could be for specific areas. Perhaps, governance and legal basis might be some of the areas where threshold conditions might be sensible to consider.
Once again, we're seeing a definite preference for yes. And you'd already identified some of the areas where the thresholds might be most indicated and most important.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we've got enough of a trend to move to the next question with 21 versus 1. Okay. Ideal format. Go for it, Rob.
So the question here is self-assessment questionnaire, perhaps done as a group within your team or externally facilitated.
And obviously there's a side of us that would like to prefer the kind of fully going for self-assessment. We are just worried that this might not be happening at country level in many contexts, that people might be glossing over the importance of some of the readiness dimensions. So that's kind of one of the trade-offs we're dealing with here.
And Meta's commenting that having both would be ideal.
Yeah, agreed.
So we
Which
can
means
consider
maybe
that.
some design variations. We could have one version for self-assessment and one version which is more for externally facilitated. There's
Yeah.
more of a mixed reaction to this one, understandably.
And Jeremy's suggesting an AI bot.
Yeah, potentially. I am apologies if I'm not allowing you all to vote, but because we have to cover so much ground, I am going for a quick trend. Go, Rob, for the last one.
Yeah, so last one is the kind of target audience slash language. So are we looking for something very technical and specialized, or are we looking for something that's more accessible, really aiming to include non-technical colleagues as well? And I think we're already seeing a clear bias in the responses there, which I think matches our thinking too.
Great. So keep it simple so that the widest possible group of people, including the non-technologists, can get it and why it's important. Yeah, that's definitely another very clear trend. I'm going to just go back to the beginning of our Mentimeter because we had one last question on just a self-assessment against the 6 dimension that Rob had mentioned. How do you feel your country or the country that you're working in is faring? And apologies, whoops. Clear results from this slide only. Confirm. Apologies. I'm going to start the presentation again on this one. So based on the readiness assessment just presented, how would you rate the readiness in your country or the country you've been most engaged in? So on a scale of 1 to 10, from very low to very high, your kind of strategic and political readiness, legal and regulatory data foundations, etc. This is a bit of a complex one. Are you able to access this question? Has it loaded for you? Starting to populate. It requires a bit more thinking before you submit. Obviously, we don't know the countries from which you're responding, but still, this gives us a bit of a sense of where the average and while this is populating, is there anyone who wants to come in on any of these topics? Otherwise, we're going to quite swiftly move on to our 2 case studies. Anyone have any burning comment on the readiness assessment before we move to our 2 country colleagues?
Yeah, we'd love to hear if there's any topics you feel should be there that you didn't see.
And obviously, let's remind everyone that you will have a chance to actually comment on these. So this group in particular, do not share it more widely because it is a draft. You will be able to provide written comments to the AI Hub. But I see, Mena, your hand went up a second. Do you want to come in? You can wait. Are you sure? Okay. So in the meanwhile, we've got now 19 people have responded and our average scores are relatively low considering, which kind of gives us a sense of, how potentially problematic and risky kind of introduction of AI can be in contexts where some of these readiness dimensions are so low. Jose, your hand has also gone up. Over to you.
Yes. Hi, Valentina. Hi, everyone. Really interesting presentation and exercise. I just wanted to mention that perhaps another dimension could go in direction of the ecosystem of actors and like digital actors. That could be a startup, GovTech, the network of vendors and so on. Because when we talk about digital, it's also about the availability of technology, right? And also external technological or digital capacities, which are not necessarily reflected there. Like it's somewhere there, but I think considering that dimension could add to the substance of the what you are measuring.
Amazing.
No,
Rob,
thanks, Jose.
Let's leave proper, deeper reactions to later. But for now, that is taken on board, and any written comments will be more than welcome. You will have a 2-week period to be doing this, and we look forward to receiving your comments. So your deadline is 28th of April, and you can use the link that was provided on the chat. So I think, Rob, I'm going to hand over now to our two case studies, which are going to be talking about where they started and kind of how they dealt with readiness. And we'll be hearing from Amirbek Polatov, who's Chief Specialist at NASP from Uzbekistan, the National Agency for Social Protection, and from Raphael Dutot, who's Manager for AI and Data Ethics at ESDC in Canada. And we're going to actually start from Raphael. So over to you. You have your 7 minutes.
Fantastic. You hear me well?
Yes.
I'll just share my screen. It won't be long. Give me a second. Perfect. You should see my screen. Let me know if it's not the case.
Yeah.
So today the idea is a little bit to tell you about who we are, what have we gone through, what assumption have we taken that were wrong, and the rest of it is all the categories in which we have been wrong at some point in time. So the first thing is that Employment Social Development Canada is the social protection agency for Canada. We also include the service delivery component, so rendering the benefits to Canadians, for example. We are a relatively large organization of about 40,000 people. And I'm going to try to tell you everything we had wrong when it came to AI. So the first thing in the hypothesis that have been proved wrong is what I would call the paradigm shift. So AI is not novel in the SDC. We have been leveraging AI to render services or to render benefit for over a decade. The thing, though, that has really changed in the past few years is this paradigm shift. We went from machine learning engineering to AI engineering. And I want to run through a little bit of what does this shift entails in terms of risk, in terms of type of cases that we're seeing arise in our institution, and how we can make sure that our governance is in a better shape in order to address these cases. So when we talk about machine learning engineering, what we're talking about is the fact that inside we have people who are looking at a problem using data, labeled data, meaning data that we know, data that we understand properly, and training a model from scratch. So the example I always give is if you want to know whether or not there's a phone in this picture, there's two ways about it. You can scan the picture and try to identify a cluster of pixels that match this phone, or you can feed thousands of pictures to an AI system and teach or train the model to recognize the phone. And this is what was mainly done in the past. Now you'll understand that in order to do these kinds of things, you need to have specialists, people with an enormous amount of training, who are familiar with the process of training a solution, the risk associated to them, the gaps they're going to encounter, so on and so forth. And we're also going to be very familiar with the problem at hand that they're going to have studied and the data that they can leverage. So there's going to be a lot of data quality assessment, so on and so forth. Now, with the rise of mainly large language model and generative AI in the past few years, what we've seen is that the pre-trained model to which we have access, meaning that models that are being trained by another institution that is doing the machine learning engineering and enabling people to use it, is becoming much more powerful. And those models are much more general purpose. You can apply them to many different things. And this led to the democratization of AI solutions, not only by people who can use, for example, ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, or whatever, in order to ask questions and get answer, but also just to take this model and apply it to a problem. For example, we receive X comment. Please tell me whether which one I should go look at and which one are just Merry Christmas and things like that. And what this democratization has done is that we no longer necessarily need data scientists and machine learning specialists in order to develop such solution. It can now be done by people who have a more common background in IT or computer science, for example. And this is extremely powerful, and it bears an enormous amount of possibilities because training such model inside an organization is costly, it's difficult, and it's not risk-free. There are odds that you're not going to succeed. So taking advantage of something that already exists is very valuable. But there's also downside. For example, the model that we're talking about, the chat GPT of this world, we don't necessarily upon which data they've been trained. We don't have a very strong knowledge of these data. We don't know the risks they bear, and we don't know the adequation with our problem. And one thing that we also see is that those computer science specialists are not necessarily always probably trained on identifying what are the gaps in their model. All this to say, we've moved from a very task-specific issue to what we call an open space problem. What it means is that in the past, if the type of cases that we would see would be cases where, for example, we're receiving, we are trying to do fraud detection and we're trying to identify which request might have been fraud. So you're trying, 1 is fraud, 0 is no fraud, and you know exactly what are the categories that you're training. If you have label data, meaning data on which you know that this was a fraud or not a fraud, you're able to test your solution to make sure that you're not making too many mistakes. And when it comes to bias, for example, you're able to test your solution against all of this to make sure that you're not biased against a certain part of the population, which would lead to discrimination. Now, in those chat GPT model or those pre-trained model, often the problem that we're going to try to address, and this is where the case diverge widely, are what we call open space problem. For example, if you put a chatbot up on your website so that it helps Canadian, in our case, navigate the website, people can ask a million different questions, and we cannot anticipate all of these questions in advance. So if the solution is biased against a certain component, it might lead to discrimination, and it's extremely difficult to test for. Furthermore, one of the big problem that we encounter is that organizations are not necessarily prepared in order to address all of these different kind of problems. And this is where I think it's very important to understand that readiness is both an organizational and a case thing. Someone in the chat said it's a little bit of both. I completely agree. You have to have processes that allow you to test for every single cases that you're going to be encountering, and allowing for the fact that there might be different kind of bias or different kind of problem that you're going to be encountering. And this is a little bit what I want to finish upon. What we've learned in the past few years, having hundreds and hundreds of cases that have come to us, is that we need to be better prepared in order to ingest them and assess them from an organizational standpoint. And what we've done is that we've created a register, for example, that allow us to see all of the cases that comes in. We intake them looking at feasibility, for example. We triage them to all of the different governance pillars, work together, not individually in silos, in order to assess them. And we're going to try to apply the proper type of assessment. Is it a fairness assessment? Or, for example, nowadays, is it a red teaming exercise that needs to be conducted? And we need to assess those solutions from all of those different categories. So passing the microphone back to you, Valentina, I'd say that for us, the biggest assumption that we have took that was wrong is to think that all cases would be relatively similar. While nowadays they diverge a lot from what was in the past, and our ability to address them really depends on the institution we build within, rather than on relying on the developer themselves in order to do it.
Fantastic. And that goes back to that use case versus kind of looking at assessing readiness across every dimension. Every use case is different, so that goes back to that
exactly.
point. Great. So if you stop sharing your screen, I'll share my screen for Dr. Pulatov, who's joining us next, and you can start in the meanwhile. Dr. Pulatov, you have 7 minutes. Thank you so much for being with us today. So Raphael, I'm waiting for your screen to perfect there. Okay. Dr. Pulatov, you should be able to see my screen now. Perfect. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, in our experience at the National Agency for Social Protection in Uzbekistan, AI readiness was not primarily a technical issue, because it is more kind of an institutional one. So we approach AI readiness through 4 key dimensions that I was able to just extract. Will be the data, the governance, legal and ethical considerations, and of course capacity. So I'll just shortly walk through each of these from our practical experience that we're facing now. So starting with the data readiness, the first and most critical dimension is data readiness. As in our case, we are working with the call center data, which initially appeared to be a strong foundation for the artificial intelligence. However, we quickly realized that the data is largely unstructured and inconsistent and systematically unlabeled for the AI to use. For example, there is no unified taxonomy for classifying call topics, or similar requests may be recorded in a different way that cannot be used, which makes it difficult to train models and generate reliable insights. So one key lesson for us was that having large volumes of data doesn't mean that the data is usable for AI. As a result, our current priority is not model development, but rather improving the data for its usable form for AI. So as a result, without this foundation, it is to make it more concrete. I'm going to just share a simple example from context. So we initially wanted to use AI to automatically classify call center conversations into topics, for example, pensions, benefits, or application status that comes for the first place. And at first, this seemed like a straightforward task. We had a large volume of call and data, and technically the models were available. But however, when we looked closer, we found that the same type of request was recorded in many different ways. There was no standardized taxonomy, or in many cases, calls were not labeled at all. So as a result, even before applying any AI model, we realized that the system would not be able to learn consistently from the data, which is enormous. We have a lot of data, but the key was turning for us that we have to understand that the main problem was not choosing the right algorithm, but preparing the data properly in its right form. So instead of moving forward with the AI, we shifted our focus to defining clear categories, standardizing how calls should be recorded, and introducing label processing. So this experience clearly showed us that without data readiness, AI cannot deliver meaningful results. However, at the government level of readiness, the second dimension was the government itself. Like, this refers on how data and AI related processes are managed within the institution. In our context, we identified challenges such as unclear data ownership, like lack of standardized workflow, or limited accountability for data quality. So these gaps create risks, because even if the technical solution is well designed, like we have a perfect architectural tree, it may not be sustainable or scalable without proper governance. We have learned that the governance is essential for ensuring consistency and, of course, coordination for the long-term viability of AI initiatives. So, therefore, one of the core focus areas is to establish clear roles at the government level, like with the clear responsibility rules, processes around data management and AI usage. Let's move on to the legal and ethical readiness. Well, it's kind of very spoken one, because this is particularly important in the social protection sector, where we handle sensitive personal data. Any use of AI must ensure the compliance with privacy regulations, the international regulations, proper data protection, responsible handling of information. Plus, AI-supported decisions must be explainable and contestable, because citizens should be able to understand how decisions are made and have the opportunity to challenge them if necessary. As like above mentioned, we have to know the methods and the data is how handled. Without these regulations, without these safeguards, the AI can create significant institutional and societal risks. Well, for us, this means really these considerations must be integrated from the beginning and not later. And well, finally, I can talk about the capacity readiness. This includes both technical skills and organizational understandings. Because while we have some technical expertise, researchers, oral capacity for working with AI is still developing. Importantly, readiness is not only about the engineers, as was mentioned, it also involves managers and decision makers that are capable of understanding the implications, limitations of the risks of usage of the AI systems. We see that capacity building is a continuous process, including training knowledge, sharing, collaboration with external experts. Strengthening this capacity is essential for ensuring that AI is used effectively and being responsible for its usage. Well, to conclude, our main takeaway is that AI readiness is fundamentally about the institutional maturity. Each of these dimensions, like data, legal, ethical frameworks, governance, and capacity, must be developed in parallel. If any of these elements are missing, like AI initiatives can face significant risks or fail to deliver meaningful value without any effect. Therefore, our approach is to focus first on building strong foundations before or even to fail to deliver meaningful value. So the example that I mentioned earlier, where we had data but could not use it effectively, is a clear illustration that the AI readiness is not about having technology or technical expertise, but having the right foundations in place. So
Perfect.
This is all I have. Thank you very
Perfect.
much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Protop. And I could have not said it better. I think that conclusion really sums it up. As we can see, the majority of the readiness dimensions are actually not linked to the technology at all. There's a huge amount of background work that needs to be happening. And in our previous discussion, you'd also mentioned how the absence of large language models for Uzbek were also a challenge, and you've been working on that and looking at regionally.
Exactly.
We can come back to that later. I just wanted to mention it for others to know, because I'm sure this is an issue that other countries face for chatbots and sort of similar use cases. Okay, great. So we've finished this part where we're hearing from you as experts, and now we're going to move more to the clinic part. And the good news is we have that extra half an hour buffer. We can use kind of as much of that as we want. And our first clinic segment is this ambition versus reality. And we don't necessarily have to follow this structure. So feel free, if you want to come in on any topics that you find are burning, or kind of any burning questions or comments, do come in on that. But the guiding questions for this first reflection is you kind of coming from your perspective, those of other people who have joined this webinar today. We're all experts, we're all grappling with similar problems, and we're all struggling, we're all facing these readiness challenges. What kind of were your AI ambitions and expectations? How did institutional reality constrain those ambitions? And what did you feel some of the biggest readiness gaps were in your institution? In the background, I'll also have the Menti open. So just let me just open the question here on the Menti. Sorry, we've already done these. It's this one. So you can pop in, if you feel too shy to speak, you can pop in answers on the Mentimeter, but otherwise feel free to speak up to these questions. And while I'm waiting for hands up or comments to pop up, I just wanted to go to the questions that actually came in the Q&A. So on one side, we had Oscar, who was saying that AI culture, awareness, human capacity, skill development should be considered as key components of the readiness tool, and security considerations, which obviously, Oscar, is one of your key areas of expertise. And Rob was answering kind of that he felt that was broadly covered on the institutional capacity and governance area. So Oscar, if you want to come in on that, do feel free to unmute your mic. You have to put your hand up actually to unmute your mic. We also had Elijo ask how we would be assessing inclusivity for these AI use cases and how would we be incorporating CSO perspectives. And Rob was saying that inclusivity would come under the accountability, ethics, and rights of beneficiaries area, and that we maybe could be building the CSO perspective further. But he had mentioned the importance of these tools being developed jointly, not just top down from the agency. So to kind of be including civil society in the process of developing these tools. I don't know if anyone wants to come in on. I'm just reading what I'm seeing in the Q&A area. Okay, and I have one more just process question around how do we contribute or make submissions to the tool. Now, if you click on the tool, you'll find that the first page actually gives you some explanation of how to comment. Basically, you'd be sending your written feedback to the DCI AI Hub, and it would be incorporated. And in fact, your contribution will be acknowledged either at individual or institutional level, however you prefer. So that's more of a process question. Does anyone want to actually raise their hand and come in, or shall we just take a look at what's popping up on the Mentimeter screen? Biggest readiness gaps: citizens' digital literacy, ethics and data protection, change management in the midst of AI community, anti-AI community awareness, legal and privacy policy. Does anyone want to comment on any of these, even among the speakers who've spoken till now, or anyone from the audience? Remember, anyone can raise their hand and unmute. Al-Hassan, Maye, please, your hand is up. Let's give you...
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right. Of course, somebody had already mentioned about digital literacy, because this was one of the key challenges, I think, that is really, really going to hold us back. I think if countries actually want to bring systems in place, like, for example, if we are targeting the healthcare space, you want to bring technology in healthcare space, you need to have a skilled workforce that are ready to utilize those product suites that you may want to deploy. Then I already made mention about change management in the midst of anti-AI. So of course we still have a huge chunk of challenge, even in deploying simple applications at community level. We still have a huge chunk of people with that kind of stuck mindset. They had this thinking that we've been doing the same thing over and over and again before this time, and now you're bringing something very difficult. We don't have the know-how to do it and not the rest of it. This could be something that we need to do. And for the change management, we need awareness raising. If at high level, we don't just need to look at lower level, even at high level, decision making body level, so that people can really understand why we need this new sheriff in town, AI. And looking at ethics and data protection as well is another big challenge that I foresee. Because we don't need to get swamped into the new honeymoon. We have AI, but we don't need to forget about our data. Is our data protected, or the AI is going to be kind of a surveillance? Because if data protections are not actually being implemented effectively, the AI tools can be used for something else, and this cannot be beneficial to the community that we are serving. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Could you just remind those who don't know you your kind of institution and country, so that we're all...
Oh, okay. I am Al Hassan Mayer, Digital Advisor for GIZ, Sierra Leone.
Thank you so much. Amazing and really good comments. And I love your honeymoon analogy. And obviously, before we're getting married to AI, we have to very seriously assess whether it's someone we want to get married to and whether there's a case for it. So let's keep that in mind in the background. And you spoke to that capacity dimension, which is very often missing. And this is something that we're seeing in some of our AI country engagements, for example, is that maybe there's a strong desire to be kind of implementing AI use cases. But if that capacity is missing at every layer of implementation, all the way from the top down to decentralized level, then we do have a big problem. I see Mena has already in the chat before and now come back to the topic of responsible AI audit formats. I don't know whether this is the moment for you to come in or whether someone before that wanted to kind of comment on what Hassan was saying. If not, Mena, if you don't mind coming in with your voice to just give us a bit of a pitch on this, I would be in favor. Or am I putting you in the spot?
No, not at all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm coming in from Egypt, and my question is more on basically, I've been reading a lot about the topic of responsible AI and ethical AI and whether there are hard laws and soft laws, and like there are different ways to approach the topic. And I'm interested to see or like to hear also from the different use cases from the different countries whether or not it's best to take on the hard track and like impose specific regulations or laws specifically when it comes to ethics and responsible AI, or should we adopt something similar to the sandboxes format, but something more like an AI assessment format where we make sure that against specific technical criteria, this AI tool is not biased, and so on and so forth? Or should we just develop guidelines and just like promote the responsible use and just educate the public and the different tech providers on the topic and how to make sure to be really doing their due diligence? So this is like an open question that I'm really interested to know from your experience. What do you think?
Oh, brilliant question. And I'm going to ask Rob, Raphael, and Amitbek if they want to come in first. And then if anybody else wants to comment either in the chat or are actually raising their hand, you're more than welcome to. So Raphael, over to you. Your hand is up.
Yeah, I can start by taking this one. So this is a very interesting question for me, and I'm tempted to answer all of the above. So the first thing when it comes to artificial intelligence is that it's a very, very broad umbrella, right? So what I like to do in these kinds of circumstances is targeting a number of solutions. So for example, in Canada, we have something called the Directive on Automated Decision Making for the government. And that directive targets mainly AI system, but AI system that deliver service to Canadians or that impact an administrative decision, hiring someone, providing them with employment insurance or anything like that. If your AI solution is related to something like this, then there's an algorithmic impact assessment, which would be kind of an evaluation. And something that I personally feel is very important is that when you conduct this assessment, we get a score. And based on the score, you're going to have different constraints, different requirements that you're going to have to meet. And I think this is especially important because the advantage of taking a risk-based approach, as long as you have a very good diagnostic tool, is that it allows you to let solutions that have less of an impact, that are more experimental, to go through without putting too much pressure on them. But when it comes to solutions that are more likely to have an impact, you can impose sets of requirements that are going to be very strict. For example, I'm a big fan of fairness assessment because fairness in AI is it's a numerical problem. You cannot hope that your system is going to be fair because you have a team that has this too hard and that you look at your data as best as you could. It remains a numerical problem that needs to be assessed against a certain number of categories. There's also the concept of so by forcing a fairness assessment, you can make sure that you identify traces of unfairness and correct for them. In a previous webinar in this series, for example, I mentioned a cases where after doing a thorough assessment, we realized that the solution was discriminating against people in the coast of the country. And going further, we realized they were people who were associated with the fishing industry because there was a clause in our Employment Insurance Act that treat them differently, which the AI solution was not able to catch. So these assessments are super important. I also think that human right impact assessment are becoming more prevalent and are going to have quite an impact. So it's a little bit of a mixed solution for me. But very curious to see what other panelists have to say about this.
Yeah, and if you have any examples of those human rights impact assessments and how you've conducted them, again, do share anything that might be useful. Even after this conversation, we will be publishing a bit of a conversation summary, and if there's any unanswered questions or any further materials we can link you to, we will be doing that. While the other panelists decide whether they want to raise their hand and answer, or if anybody else from the audience wants to come in, because it is an informal discussion, there's another question coming from Jose Diaz Mendoza to both of you, kind of Uzbekistan and Canada. And it's a really interesting one because it's one that comes up again and again in terms of our relationship as government with private sector providers and the procurement issue. So how did your organizations deal with procurement of technology and AI solutions? And do legal frameworks, did they require any type of adjustments, for instance, also in terms of flexibility, speed, vendor approach, or any other dimensions? So I can see Mr. Polotov has already put his hand up, so over to you.
So thank you very much. It's an important question. To be honest, in our case, we're still at the early stage, so we have not yet moved into large-scale procurement of AI solutions. However, this question is already is very relevant to us because, from our perspective, traditional public procurement frameworks are not always well aligned with the nature of AI projects because it's often require flexibility, close collaboration with vendors, and iteration, as you asked. So AI development is not a one-time delivery, I think. So it is an evolving process that depends on the data quality, continuous adjustment, experimentation, live pilot versions. So therefore, we see a need for more flexible procurement approach. For example, allowing pilot project phase implementations and closer collaborations and interactions with solution providers, such as foreign experts that we're inviting to consult on every project that we're engaging. So at the same time, the flexibility needs to be balanced with transparency, compliance with existing regulations, with the accountability, rather than the fully changing the legal frameworks. We see value in adapting procurement practices from foreign countries that have already successfully developed their regulations. For example, through pilot-based contracting or innovation-friendly procedures, like while still operating within the current regulatory structure. So this is the area we're like actively exploring as we move forward. So this is all I can say from our perspective.
Great. And what we do know is exactly, I mean, those regulations and regulatory frameworks are there to protect us. But obviously there are some changes and shifts that might be needed because of the way AI shifts what can be done. And so new risks are introduced, and that's something we also explore in some of the AI Hub risks tools as well. So if anybody else wants to come in on this topic, please do. Otherwise, I just want to signal very quickly that we've had Sojcic share an example of a type of ethical impact assessment and human rights impact assessment, which has been done by the government of Catalonia, and you can find that in the chat. And Jeremy Joslin, who's saying that we should be separating two types of uses of AI. One is those that are helping agents to analyze and make decisions, and the others that are making decisions directly. And this is something that in our AI Hub taxonomy and in our literature review, we're very clearly separating these cases, and the role of the human in the loop or on the loop or out of the loop may have a kind of very different implications for risks and benefits, and that's kind of very clearly documented in the work that we've been doing with AI Hub. We have Mirene Majdalani who's saying we're thinking in the organization to develop an agent where we can upload our institutional memory and documents we have previously, so that the agent will be able to follow our approach. So this is similar to other things we've seen kind of in some existing AI use cases in the sector, where we have kind of use cases that are kind of LLMs that are focused on our own knowledge repository, on our own past experience. But it's slightly out of topic in terms of AI readiness, but if you want to start answering that in the meanwhile, I'll remind everyone that I've just opened a new question on the Mentimeter as well. So let me just share that quickly so you see it on your screen. What should institutions resist doing too early, and what could they do differently? If anyone wants to start answering that question as well. And I think in about 5 minutes, we'll shift to the off-the-record discussion as well. So we'll stop recording and we can start having our off-the-record discussion. And in fact, before handing over to any reactions to the question from Mirene, I also have a question from Sojcic on building on what Rafael has said about Canada's directive. Are your respective organizations thinking of ways to adapt existing data or algorithmic governance mechanisms and infrastructure to new Gen AI technologies? So is this process already happening? So over to any of you, and especially obviously Amirbek and Rafael, if you want to be answering that. And in the meanwhile, others can start answering this question that I have open on the Mentimeter.
So I can jump in very quickly, Valentina, with just a quick plug for the risk assessment tool that the AI Hub's working on, which I think you kind of mentioned as one of the knowledge products at the start of this. So I mean that will explicitly help to kind of do that kind of risk assessment that Raphael was talking about and steer you as to whether your AI use case is high risk or lower risk, which would then obviously kind of move you in the direction of what kind of audits or accountability mechanisms you might want to consider. So watch for that. It'll be coming out before too long.
Yes. And yay, because it's been ongoing for a while. I don't know, Rafael or Amirbek, do you want to answer any of those?
I can take a shot of some of those. There's a few very interesting questions. The first thing I want to just bring back to the table, there was a comment about the big difference between supporting an administrative decision and rendering one. And it's completely true. There is a major difference there. But one thing that I want to emphasize is that often we see a human in the loop as a silver bullet. Oh, there's a human in the loop, we're going to be good. And I want to be very careful about that. There's a process called automation bias, whereas if an AI solution, and it will often be the case, is right 90% of the time, at one point, you're going to stop seeing the 10% of the time where it's wrong, and you start just rubber stamping the decision. And this is where it can lead to massive problem. As such, although those circumstances are distinct, it's important not to confound them with other things that are more on the operational side, for example. That are not necessarily going to lead to an administrative decision, that might just be a facilitating things and so on and so forth. So that's the first point I'd like to make. And when it comes to generative AI, I'd say one point that we've touched less upon that is very interesting is IT readiness. So a big distinction between more traditional AI and generative AI is that traditional AI has often been able to be run either locally or on a cloud service, for example, that you've established for your institution. One of the things that happen with generative AI and so on is that you often have to access those solutions through an API, for example, to a server that's going to be hosted elsewhere. And this can lead to a lot of sovereignty problem because the vast majority of the AI solution are hosted, for example, in the United States. It can lead to also a number of security issue because you can have open endpoints and so on and so forth. So one of the big components about readiness when it comes to generative AI is finding a way to take advantage of these models in a secure fashion. We have seen a few countries do things that are extraordinary in order to make this happen. We have seen country open data center in how do you call that? In embassies in order to protect themselves from access or involuntary access and so on. So it's a very interesting question, but this is one of the readiness component of generative AI that is very difficult to tackle at the moment. And I think a lot of countries are currently working toward trying to address these issues. So yeah, I don't know if someone else want to chime in on this.
Before I hand over to Mr. Pulatov, really quickly, just to say that even the chat is very lively. People obviously have a preference not to be necessarily speaking up with their videos, but the chat is spot on. So there's comments around exactly the key being to avoid a culture of people being able to say, "Oh, the AI told me this," or that cognitive surrender, which comes with it must be right, it must know something that I don't know, and therefore push button, push button, push button, which is what we've kind of also seen in the use in military recently. There's a long point which I want to read to you quickly and it goes back to the point that you made, Rafael, is that sometimes we don't want, in a sense, it's better not to have this happening in the shadows. It's better to bring it out and at least we can be working on it together and improving it and actually building the safeguards around it. So Aziz is saying, it seems to me that several important risks should be discussed. On the one hand, public officials may increasingly resort to the use of unauthorized or unevaluated digital or AI solutions operating outside any institutional governance framework. They're doing it anyway, and that's part of the issue. That's why we need to be building kind of a broader common knowledge around how to do it right and being transparent about it. And on the other hand, citizens are relying more and more on external solutions outside the government ecosystems to access information, navigate services. They're probably uploading internal government documents to their private chat GPTs and kind of releasing government data to private systems. And more broadly, these dynamics raise the issue of the public sector's lag in adopting such technologies at scale. So really, really great point, Aziz. So if in your final reaction, before we go to I really want to keep a last 15 minutes of off-the-record discussion. So a last reaction to this point, and then we move to the off-the-record part. Or to any prior points, Mr. Pulatov or Rafael, yeah.
You're good?
I can just institutions should resist four things. I mean, rushing into AI without data readiness, adopting AI without clear use cases, scaling without governance, and of course, ignoring social impact. Because instead of those, they I think should start with small, well-defined pilots on focusing and building strong foundations. That's it.
Again, super well said. Very succinct and incisive. Fully endorsed. Did Rob or Rafael or anyone want to add to that?
I think it's really well said. One of the big components that we have to make sure that happens is transparency. For example, the government of Canada just adopted an AI register that is transparent to the public to document the use of artificial intelligence within the document, within the country. And I think that these kinds of things are things that are going to enable us to foster trust and take advantage of these technology while maintaining the social contract. So transparency is a key point for me in addressing these.
Brilliant.
Okay, so I'll just add one last point, if I may, Valentina. Building on transparency is feedback loops. I think we need mechanisms, obviously, not just for officials to feel empowered to contest what AI is saying, but also the people that are directly affected and those that are advocating for them.
Absolutely. And we're seeing some of these points coming up also, again, in the what should institutions resist doing too early questions? What could they do differently? They should avoid rushing into AI without strong data foundations, focus on small, high-impact pilots, data quality, building a decision-driven culture. They should avoid adopting AI technologies that are not needed, that are not really responding to kind of a strong need and that bring too high risks. Data and use of data until they know, well, the AI, the protocol, and kind of until they've assessed kind of all of these dimensions of readiness and the risks using ideally a version of the AI Hub readiness assessment tool, etc. So you can see kind of some of these points coming up also from our audience. Great. I think this is the moment then for me to ask for the recording to be interrupted. So if please the socialprotection.org team, who is always fantastically supporting us in the background, can be